At our home in Wyckoff, we have a old one-horse barn. It's a small stable that we converted into a blacksmith shop. And one of the decorations on one of the eaves, we have a star which is painted white. So when we started doing this, spending more time doing the blacksmithing, I was thinking, well, it would be nice to have a name with a logo, and that's where White Star Forge evolved from. This was a old fireplace poker, but the end broke off, so I'm repurposing it to make just a little coal rake for the forge. Most of the work I do, I try to repurpose or reuse as much material as I can. That goes for the tools that I make, the punches that I make. I use a lot of springs, a lot of leaf spring, and tools that have been used in the past but are maybe no longer functional, but they still have a life in them. So this is a very simple rake, coal rake. And it's just about done.
Here, this large piece here, this is called a swage block. So it has all of these different holes in it and a lot of different shapes in it. So this isn't bolted to the wood. So if I needed to, I could lift it out and I could turn it, and I could use this shape here to shape my steel, or I could use this one. And it also has these holes in it so it can hold all of my different tools. So I have this is called a hot cut, and it slots right into this hole here, and it's just a large chisel, and I can use it to cut my steel. I just lay the steel on top of it, and I hammer on it, and it's great because then I don't need to use a hand to hold the chisel. So there's all different tools, they all have different purposes. I'm using this one right now because it's rounded, and I'm drawing out my steel to make it thinner. So it's like if you press modeling clay with your thumb, the part that you press is going to get thinner. So that's why I'm using this rounded piece here to thin it out. So that's scale. So what happens is that as the metal heats, pieces of it flake off as the impurities heat out of it.
It's a chemical reaction with the oxygen that's in the atmosphere. The surface of the metal and the temperature of the metal, the carbon that's in it has a reaction with the oxygen, and that's commonly, it's called scale. It happens with all metal, and even with metal that comes straight from the this is straight from the foundry. You can see that the metal has sort of a grayish color. That's called mill scale. New surface is exposed to the oxygen, and that creates more scale. So if I file it, you can see the metal underneath it is very shiny. That's the steel. That's the steel that I want to get to. Okay, that's where the scale is removed. There's no such thing as pure iron anymore. Wrought iron has not been manufactured commercially since the 1950s or 1970s. So everything is steel. Steel is a combination of iron, carbon, and perhaps other minerals. Okay? So a mild steel, which is very basic steel, it's the most common steel, is iron and 0.18% carbon, or in that general area. As the carbon level increases and goes from 0.18% up to about, let's just say for example, 0.45%, it becomes what is known as a tool steel, which is a much tougher steel. It will hold an edge for a knife or a chisel or something like that.
Does it have less carbon in it then, or more carbon?
No, the carbon went up from 0.18% to 0.45%.
So the more carbon, the stronger
to a point. Once we go beyond 1% carbon, then the metal starts to get very brittle, and it's called cast iron. Like cast iron for your barbecue.
Like a furnace would have made cast iron.
Like a furnace, okay, which is a very hard steel, but it's also very brittle. It can crack. So you would not use that to make a tool or something like that, because it just will not hold an edge. It will eventually bend. So most of the steel that we're using today is it's called 1018. 10 meaning it's iron, and 18 meaning it's that 0.18% carbon. As we increase the numbers, as numbers change, say 4140 means it's 40% carbon, but that 4 in the very beginning means a certain amount of molybdenum and chromium in it.
Really?
Okay, so there are many, there are hundreds of different varieties of steel, depending on what you want to make.
Like the famous 316.
Well, 316 is that's a stainless steel, okay, and yeah, that has carbon in it, has a lot of chrome and nickel in it. Okay, that is something that we would not use here for forging, for the blacksmith, because generally it's too tough, and I cannot temper it, I cannot harden it. Okay, again, this is the way blacksmithing has been done for thousands of years. This is basic. We have heat, we have anvil, we have a hammer, and we're just moving metal around as part of what we're doing. Stainless is a very specific type of steel, and there's 316, 321, then there's an L grade, which means it has low carbon in it, so there's many different types. Okay, but what we're doing here is mostly with mild steel, which means it's a very strong steel but will not hold an edge. But later on I'll probably make a chisel or a punch, something like this, and this is a tool steel, and this will I made this many years ago. I use it a lot. Has a lot of cracks in it now, but this is a tool steel that has it still has a lot of life left in it. Okay, I'm going to punch a little hole in this piece of steel. This is mild steel. This is a tool steel. As I quench the tip in water, I have a little bucket down here. I want to make a little slot. So what I'm doing is I'm punching a slot into that steel. Okay, you can see that. And then once that slot is punched through, I'm going to widen it into a larger hole. Because ultimately what that's going to be is this is going to turn into a keychain like this. So that slot is the beginning of this hole here. Okay, it's a great little keychain. It's a combination of keychain, bottle opener,
There's a bottle
and
opener
it fits on your
there.
belt loop like that. It's a great little thing. Now what we're burning here, this is a coal. This is bituminous coal, and it gets extremely hot. It's relatively clean as far as coal goes. It's very hot. It'll get so hot that we could easily burn the steel and destroy it. It's a sample of that over here. I think over here.
Left corner.
Over here. Yep. This was we were doing a demonstration. I was to a bunch of children. I was making a dragon, but then started talking, not paying attention, and the steel burned right up.
Wow.
Okay, so that's how hot this gets. At that temperature, it probably was in the area of around 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. It gets extremely hot.
Why is that coal so hot? Is that like a very dense coal? What
It's bituminous coal. It's readily available. I mean, that's the nature of coal. Okay, it's dirty, it's smelly, but it's very efficient. It gets really a lot of BTUs, a lot of heat out of a small area. You know, once you get it lit and keep feeding oxygen into it, fanning the flame, so to speak, okay, it will get really hot. Okay, and it's easy to control. I just stopped fanning the flame. We have a little blower in the back there. That's what we're cranking. That's a new blower. And if we stop doing that, stop feeding oxygen, it starts to gradually die down. Not die down, but just get a lower temperature.
Yeah.
So we have to pay attention to what we're doing. Okay? But for example, if I wanted to weld two pieces of steel together like this, Okay, that would certainly be hot enough that I would be able to get the surfaces of the metal just to that molten point right before it starts to burn, touch them together, and they will stick. And then hammer it together, and this is welded, these are 2 pieces of steel welded here.
Wow, that's very good.
Now, get back to this.
Really nice.
Do you have a forge in Wyckoff?
I do. Now I can feel that punch is pretty much going as far as it's going to go. It's sort of bottomed out over there. You can see it's a pretty deep hole. And you can see the impression of the punch on the back.
Sure.
Okay, so now it's cooled off a little bit, so which is good. That's what I wanted to do. It's cooled off a little bit, so now I'll be able to go from the back side, and I center my punch just directly above it like that. Hopefully, not quite there yet. See that little slug? It's sheared off. It's still stuck in there. I'll be able to punch that through now. Off a little bit too much.
At some point, you put it back on the flame?
Yeah, when it's not moving anymore, I just put it back in the fire. If things are not going as you plan, the best thing is to stop, make any adjustments right then, because it'll be more difficult to do later on. So just cooled off a little bit, so I'm going to put it back in the fire for a second and then punch it right through. That's one of the beauties of blacksmithing, is that it's relatively forgiving in that regard, to a degree.
Right.
What are these fire stokers?
I'm sorry?
What are these? Are these to stoke a fire? Oh, okay. You
So
can do whatever you
just
want to
made
make.
them. Whatever,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
whatever. Actually, these I made for a client. Several of these are, I call them a garden stake. Okay, it has like a fiddlehead fern on the tip here. And what that lady did with them is that she would walk her dog on her property, or sometimes she would then stick it in the ground, put the leash on the dog so it wouldn't wander away. Or you could put it on the edge of your flower bed, and if you're dragging a hose across your lawn, it's not going to go into the flower bed.
Oh, that's a good idea.
I'm gonna start making a series of these that are a little bit taller, say about this tall. Open this, now you can place a strip rope through there, I'll punch a hole, another, so you can make a border or like fence, or to hold up your peonies or flowers that would be flopping over a lot.
How do you get the twisting in there?
How do I put the twist in there? That's everybody asks that question. Twists like that are very decorative. They capture your eye. It's one of the easiest things that it's simple. Basically, we'll demonstrate it in a little bit. But basically, what I would do is get a section of steel hot, hold this in the vise that's over there. Blacksmithing is all about making tools. So I would hold one section in the vise. This is now red hot. That's in the vise. So I would grab it like this with this thing and twist. And it's really easy to do. The hard part would be to make sure that your heat is uniform. So you have a uniform twist. You can see on this one here, it's a little bit tighter here than it is over here. Okay, that's because it was hotter here than it was there. Okay. So yeah, that's called a waterfall twist, and it's just
Yeah,
going
we
back and
actually
forth.
got it all cleaned up
But
yesterday.
the important thing here is that again, blacksmithing is all about making tools. So before I was able to make the twists, I had to make these things so I could grab the steel and twist it. And once it's hot, even though this is half-inch square bar, which is a pretty thick piece of steel, it's quite strong, it's really easy to twist.
So
Good.
what I'm trying to do is
Plant
I'm
hangers, I
trying
imagine?
to-
Sorry?
Plant hangers?
Yeah, you can hang whatever you want. A plant hanger. This would be more of a plant hanger, something like this or like that. With these things, again, I like to demonstrate. We do a lot of demonstrations for school groups and what have you. This is to show that back in the day of this, when this was a working foundry and a working factory, a blacksmith would be making hooks like this, or what they would do is they could close these hooks, and now you close them up a little bit. Now you have a chain, and that's the chain that they would use for the horse to draw the plow, what have you. I made those. These were made by other blacksmiths, and this was forge welded here. This you can see was forge welded. This shackle was made by a blacksmith. And here's an old chain. I don't know how old this chain is, but it is clearly blacksmith made because the links are not uniform. If this was made in a factory, the links would all be uniform. But this is several hundred years old. It's starting to come apart over here. It's an old chain made by a blacksmith many decades, generations ago. And this was forge welded up on the end.
Do you imagine that chain is in effect of the same, I heard you talking about the contents of the iron and all of, would that be more or less what you're using today? Or
Very
is there any
similar.
way- very
I don't know the exact composition,
very
but
similar
very
to
similar.
it.
Yeah, not too much.
So-
Yeah.
Wow.
That's why when we make things like this, they will last forever. They'll be here for generations. That's for sure. I don't know how old this is. We are the resident blacksmiths at the Upper Saddle River Historical Society, and this was on their property. I don't know how long ago this was made, but it's something. It's a piece of history. The blacksmith who made this is long gone. Okay, but their work still
Lives
here.
on.
Yep,
Just like yours will.
probably. I hope so.
Can I ask
Oh,
about
here.
your partner?
There's
Are
the-
you from Green Skull Forge? Is that you?
Yes, that's me.
I grabbed your card too.
Oh, great.
there's
It's so interesting to see a
the
young
other half
woman
of
doing
my,
this.
my dragon.
Is your background and interest in like arts and design?
Yeah, I actually have an art degree, art education, but yeah, blacksmithing is most of the art that I do. And while he mostly focuses on tool making and making larger stuff like that, I mostly do smaller sculptural works.
Those bracelets that you made, are those copper though?
Yes, those are all
Okay.
copper.
Do you have a preferred metal to work in?
It depends on what I'm making. I really like using copper because it's a little bit more forgiving. You can work it cold, so I can do details a little bit more carefully with copper. Because if you heat up copper, it'll get soft, and then after it cools, it'll stay soft.
Carbon on the surface.
So, but steel, once it gets cold, you lose that softness, and you completely lose that. So what's great about the copper is that I can put fine details into it a lot more easily than I can with the steel.
That's what the Civil War furnace is like too.
That's what this gets to as well.
The colonial furnace only got up to 1500 or 1800. Yeah.
And that's
Well, they would be able to melt the ore, I think. Well, they had to, yeah.
You have to carry the anvil.
It operated melting the ore with
Two-man lift.
no coal.
wow.
Charcoal, limestone.
The anvil is this is a 150-pound anvil. The base is
Yeah, they
probably
could make a
another
couple
40,
tons a week. Wow. The colonial.
something like that.
Civil War.
This anvil is made by a company called Fisher Norris that was making anvils in Trenton, New Jersey from I don't know, from the early 1800s up until they were active. I think until the 1960s they were still.
Wow.
And their logo is an eagle. And the story is that they made all of the anvils for the North during the Civil War, except at night. At night they made anvils and they sold them to the South. they were a very entrepreneurial company.
Yeah.
You know,
Don't tell anyone.
but it's a really good anvil. It's a very desirable anvil. It's a plate of tool steel that's welded to an iron body, and it's called a city anvil because it sounds loud, but it's really not. If you hear other anvils, they have a very distinct ring like a bell, and it's really loud, very annoying. So this is something you could use in the city and not really disturb your neighbors, assuming that they're not built right on top of each other. But this is city. It's a great anvil.
It almost looks like it's a plate across the top.
That's what it is. It's a plate of tool steel here, and on this part of the horn that's welded. They had a patent on how it was welded at the foundry, put together.
Wow.
And it's a really good anvil. And you know, people think of anvils as, you know, out west or what have you. The biggest anvil makers were Fisher Norris in Trenton, New Jersey, and another one called Hay Budden Company, which was based in Brooklyn. So they all came from around here, and of course in Pittsburgh and Connecticut and areas like that.
You're going to pay shipping on that, though.
You're right. And it's a nice anvil. It's obviously had a long life, a tough life, but just by nature of its function, it's subject to abuse every day.
Yeah, that's the job. It looks like you have a magnet stuck to the side of it there. What are we doing with that?
A couple of things. The magnet, I actually have one there. I have a couple underneath somewhere. It's to reduce the ring, number one. But the other reason is I would put the anvil here, and if I were tempering steel, hardening and tempering it, what you want to do is you want to bring the steel beyond what is known as its critical temperature. And that's at a point where all of the molecules, the iron and the carbon, everything is like really mellow and, at the critical temperature. That's the point where it's no longer magnetic.
Oh,
So I would take it out of the fire and I would put it on here, and if it doesn't stick, so I know it's past its critical temperature.
Right.
And then I would go to the next step. This is a nail header. And what a blacksmith would do was take a piece of rod and they would put a point on it, and then they would stick it into this header like this, something like that, and then they would hammer down on it, and this would make the head.
Or while it
Flip
was
it over
hot,
and knock
right?
it out. Sorry?
Or while it was red hot.
Well, everything's red hot. Everything's hot. So what a blacksmith would do is they would already know how long the nail is going to be from this thick material, this thickness of material. Okay, so they would make a point on it, and let's say it had to be 3 inches. At 3 inches, they would cut into it with a chisel, but not cut through. Stick it in here, break it off where the cut is, and then hammer down to make the head. Actually, a good blacksmith can make a lot of nails, but the way a blacksmith started as an apprentice, he was making the nails. He or she was making the nails.
So one of the first things you learned.
That was one of the first things they learned, and they were actually paid by the nail.
Okay, so you want to make it nice.
So what they want to do is they want to make it nice, but they want to make it quick. You get paid by the nail, you don't want to spend 5 minutes making a nail.
Right.
You want to make 2 nails a minute. Okay, that was the objective.
And that's a realistic thing.
That would be,
Do a minute.
I think so. That would be very realistic. I saw some demonstrations down at Colonial Williamsburg, and that's what they were doing. They were making 2 nails a minute, and just they knew exactly what they were doing. And then as blacksmiths progressed, they found ways to make nails even faster until they had a long wire and a nail making machine, and they sort of were a victim of their own ingenuity, because now where you might need 2 blacksmiths making nails, you only needed 1, or 1 you don't need 10. Same thing with making chains. A blacksmith eventually invented a machine to make chains faster. So now instead of having a bunch of blacksmiths making chains, you had a machine.
Right.
So 5 blacksmiths didn't have any work to do now. So they're again a victim of their own ingenuity. If I needed a chain and I went here and they said, okay, I'll have it done for you in a week, or I went over here and said, yeah, I'll have it for you in 2 hours. That's who's going to get all the business, and those blacksmiths eventually went out of business.
They were trying to make a commercial. They had a mixture doing that. They had industrial stuff to do. So everything that they used to make was like pieces of.
Alright, so it's just about done.
How come it's so shiny? Is it wet?
Yes, it's wet. I quenched it so I can handle it. It's just about done. I'm gonna file it down a little bit, polish it up, and then it'll be done.
What kind of finish will it have on it? What color will it?
It'll be similar to the steel that's on the apron on the table.
So that blackish, shiny.
Yeah, shiny.
It won't be like red of that.
No, it won't be as bright as this.
If you wanted to, is it possible to make that, end up making that as shiny as that? It would take a lot more work.
It would. So you would have to go over it a few different times with different grits of sandpaper, or you could also sandblast it. I'm just going to file it down a little bit, especially around the edges, and buff it up using a buffing wheel at home.
Because, I love iron, so that color, if it ends up that's cool for me. But I would think most people would prefer shiny.
Yeah.
When you think of jewelry, you kind of think shiny.
Yeah, I mean, I prefer this as well, honestly, but part of the problem is that it's not very clean. So you do need to buff it up anyway, even if it's just to get the little bits of grit out. And if you feel it, it does feel a little bit rough. Yeah, so it's something that you do need to clean up and polish at least a little bit. There are different ways that you can heat it again and quench it in certain materials to get it to a darker color.
Now what about after the customer gets it? Do they need to keep it soft and stuff, or does it like oxidize or anything, or it'll stay like that?
As long as it's maintained, as long as it's not, if it gets wet, dry it off. Other than that, there's not really a whole lot of maintenance that needs to be done. So, first thing to do, even as I'm brushing it, it is starting to brighten up a little bit. So it's not a very slow process. But yeah.
It's not quite the shade of those, like I'm thinking of the art things that are twisted the art things.
Yeah. So,
I mean, yeah, here's good.
so those were shined up at home on a wire wheel.
Oh, okay.
So that was done a lot more mechanically than this. So it'll basically be a much brighter version of this.
And I guess you can do various shades, but how much polish?
Yeah, also depending on what you use. Like there are different, again, if you treat it using different chemicals and stuff like that, you can get a different finish on it. So I'm going to file down some of these edges here because they're a little bit sharp. And then we'll be all set.